Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be joining the Python maintainers. Thank you so much for watching my talk. My first job out of school was as a developer advocate at IBM. I was 3 years into my computer science degree. I had transferred from my community college, Laney College in Oakland, to the University of California, San Diego, and I was having a rocky transition to say the least. It was by far one of the worst periods of my life, and compounded with that was this transition that I was making to university. Was not having a great time at all. And one of the ways that I coped with that was going to a community that I had always felt belonging in and validation from, and that's hackathons. And through some partnerships with Major League Hacking and GitHub, I was able to travel around to different hackathons on the weekends and help other students create projects. In this process, I met some developer advocates at a hackathon, and they watched me help some students troubleshoot an API and watched how I was able to give them assistance with making their demos work. And they said, "You would make a great developer advocate." And naturally, I said, "What's that?" And after they described it to me, I recognized it as a career path that was interesting to me. And so when I decided that I had had enough of school, I left and found a place on this IBM developer advocacy team. This picture was taken before my first talk. And I was giving a talk about an audio project that I had built as a summer intern. And I was wearing my motivational speaker shirt, which just has a speaker on it that says, "You can do it." This is my friend Nick. I chose this picture because I feel it adequately sums up his personality. This is not a picture that I chose to make a dig at him. This is the picture that he chose as his company-wide identifier on Slack. If you looked him up at IBM, this is what you would see. He is a brilliant engineer and a strange and hilarious man. One of my favorite people. And one of the things that I like about Nick is that he gets an idea for something and then goes and builds a proof of concept of it. Just random stuff that comes up, and I'll get a text, "Hey, wouldn't it be cool if there was this thing?" And then I'd come the next day and there'd be this like proof of concept of it. And what it allowed for me was an opportunity to help me fight some of the imposter syndrome that I felt by not finishing my computer science degree, because I could contribute code to his repositories and he would look them over and merge the code in. And I was like, "Oh, I'm a real engineer. Like this is how things work." And there was one PR that I made where he commented on it, and I felt like I have made the right choice. I am a real engineer. I can do anything. All because of a comment that he wrote. And what he wrote on my PR was LGTM, which stands for "Let's Get That Money." No, that's not what it means. That's what I thought it meant when I saw it. So I was hyped up about it. I was like, oh, he saw the code that I made and it was so good that he was like, "Let's get this money." No, he was saying that it looked good to him, which I had later explained to me by a manager who also reviewed the code and said the same thing. And I was like, "Nick, maybe he meant that, but my manager definitely did not mean that." But I spent an embarrassing amount of time thinking that that's what it stood for. And that's what this talk is about. My name is Nigel Brown. I am a senior open source community manager at VMware. And this talk makes a case for being more intentional and careful in our language, and recognizing that just because something looks good to us, things are getting lost in translation. Now, I am not a linguist. I'm a person who's transitioned into tech and has stories about when these assumptions go wrong, and sometimes very wrong, and some propositions for how we can move forward with a more collective and inclusive vocabulary. As a takeaway from this presentation, I hope you'll leave with a better appreciation for etymology, some funny stories, and some serious considerations around how to better communicate. It is no secret that acronyms are everywhere in our daily life. We've gotten so used to them that sometimes we don't even realize they're acronyms. Laser and scuba are really good examples of this. I have learned now, since I wrote this talk the first time, that that's known as initialism, where you take the first letter of every word and smush it together and then pronounce the word that it makes. That will come in handy later. One of the career paths I had was in the military. And when I was there, it felt like every other word was an acronym. There were things like your AFSC, which is your job. There's a SITREP, which is a situation report. There's FUBAR, when things are really messed up, or a soup sandwich. SNAFU, when FUBAR becomes what you expect. OTF, which meant you left when you weren't supposed to, and RTFM, which I've seen in tech as well, which is, let's say, a polite request to refer to the documentation. But the list goes on and on and on. And sometimes these acronyms or the practice of creating them makes their way into the mainstream. There was this meme format that made its rounds a few years ago, and if you're unfamiliar with what this is, it's the NATO phonetic alphabet. And so when you're having to spell a word out over the phone, for example, you just say these words and almost universally people recognize them to be the intention or to stand for whatever letter that you're saying. Back to that initialism that we talked about before, those eagle-eyed viewers who are reading this will see that if you do take the first letter of all of these words and start pushing them together, you'll realize that this is an elaborate rickroll. I apologize, but it gets the point across of how we use these things to communicate in ways that make their way out into the mainstream. This understanding, what I learned in the military is that this understanding that we get by being able to read something like this helps us feel more belonging. It helps us feel like we have some almost clandestine knowledge to be able to speak in what sounds to lay people as code. But there are some downsides. There is far too much to know. Every time I go to a conference or I look into a new concept and take it to as far as it goes, I learn that there are so many things that I don't know. And we as engineers have an opportunity to not make that more difficult than it needs to be. Some of the dangers that we have when we do what I'm saying of this like almost intentional obfuscation or like making things more difficult to understand is that we have the effect of excluding certain people from this special knowledge that we have. And in some ways, like in the way that I mentioned in the story at the beginning, like it wasn't bad. It was a kind of funny mistake. And the meaning still tracked to a certain extent, just like with less enthusiasm. But for other people, they read these, what looks like an alphabet soup, and feel like they don't belong or they're so far behind because they don't know what this thing means. And it seems like everybody knows or everybody speaks this way. And it has this sense of overwhelming, it gives this sense of overwhelming, like lack of inclusion. And one of the other issues that we can run into by using a lot of acronyms or by not looking into other meanings that things have are a lot of noise being created. Now, I have a very juvenile sense of humor. I know this about myself. If you meet me, you will find that out as well. And there was a story last year, I believe, where they dragged in all of the heads of Facebook before Congress, and people were asking them questions. And one of them asked, what is Facebook going to do to stop Finstas? And what it showed what appeared to be a fundamental lack of understanding of what a Finsta was. And people online took this opportunity to ask other questions or to propose other questions that they hoped that they would ask about. And one of the things that was very common in the replies to these tweets was, are they going to ask about BOFA next? Like, what is Facebook going to do about BOFA? Now, if you don't know what BOFA is, I'm going to leave that as an exercise for the viewer to look up. Perhaps look it up when only you can see it. Or ask, well, no, just look it up on your own. But if you look it up, you'll see that it is very far from the intention of like what Bank of America wants to be recognized as. And so one of the replies to the tweet saying that, oh, they should ask about BOFA was someone saying, hey, it's pretty cool that someone created a whole account to help those suffering from BOFA. Make sure to help and support, or make sure to support BOFA help. And a lot of people in turn started tagging this account, which is a very serious verified Twitter account that's supposed to be helping people with Bank of America problems. It's now inundated with people making comments because they think it's funny. So that's another downside of us just throwing in acronyms everywhere and not really taking the time to look at what they might mean to other groups of people, like LGTM or BOFA. What can we do about it? So I personally believe that tech is one of the worst offenders when it comes to explaining things in an approachable manner. And there's two versions of this that I see. There's a version where we sort of justify our skill and salary by making things more difficult or making it seem like what we're doing is way harder than it is. So that we're proud of our mastery and then can go and, reap the benefits of all of that entails. And there's another version of this where we set far too high a level of assumed knowledge, and we don't adequately look at where people are supposed to start. What is the on-ramp to consuming this thing that we've made? And this is where I think you all, as the maintainers, have an incredible opportunity. At my company, VMware, we have this tool called What the Define, which we abbreviate WTF. And what it allows us to do is we see an acronym, some product, or some tool, and we type it into WTF, and then it tells us what that thing means. And I would love to see more resources like this. Or I've read other things on the internet where they'll have tooltips that hover over words that might be difficult that link out to other content. And that's another opportunity for us that's another thing that we can do to help with this sort of thing. But my main suggestions are to be more intentional with our language, to say exactly what we mean, and to provide resources for learners. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a huge lift from you. One of the things that we can do is spending more time mentoring so we can see how people learn and be able to cater our content more towards that. And another thing that we can do is to create or find content that can act as prerequisites for yours. Now, I'm not sure the path to maintainership that you all had, but I would challenge you to think about what could have made it easier for you and what can you do to make it easier for those that come behind you. One of the things that I'm striving to do always is to be the person that I wish I had in some situation. And you all have an incredible opportunity to do that with where you are. The effort that we spend creating more inclusion in our industry is not wasted. One area that I've been focusing on lately with respect to inclusive language is to do with mental health, because it is very often that we use a lot of derogatory terms for mental health to describe things in tech that are difficult. We call them crazy or insane, and I don't think that's okay. I would challenge you to look up those words and see if the definitions are an accurate representation of what we're trying to convey. I think that we are brilliant people and we can choose better acronyms. Bearing all of that in mind, I want to thank you all so much for your time and for this opportunity to come and chat with you all. Good luck out there. Thank you for the hard work that you do.